Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session in the Researcher Toolbox series. My name is Daneshri Motley, and I am the core products consultant for Elsevier. I'm based in Durban in South Africa, and in my role, I work with research organizations and universities that are based in sub-Saharan Africa. And we are really pleased to have you with us today. I'm starting the session a little bit early so that we have enough time to give our speakers a chance to share. So before we begin, I'd just like to let you all know that the chat box is now enabled. So if you'd like to send any messages through or speak to each other, you can use the chat box. But I do urge you, if you have any questions, to please put it in the Q&A box, because as the chat box gets full with messages, we might miss your question, but if it is in the Q&A box, we'll be able to address it. Just to also ensure that you know where to find our sessions, remember that you can get access to the Africa Researcher Success portal. The link to the portal is in the chat box. And in this portal, you'll be able to find our upcoming webinars. There's only one more left this year. We do 2 per month. Any resources and training. So if you need to watch a full product training on Scopus or Science Direct, or watch any of the tutorials, if you don't have time for full training, you can access it here. If you're a librarian and you would like to get access to accredited or certified training, you can find links here. And the recording of this session, as well as the prior sessions that we hosted this year, will be found under recorded webinars. So do take note of the link in the chat box. It is my great pleasure to introduce our esteemed speakers today. The first speaker that I'd like to introduce is Matthew, who is the editor for one of the editors of the Cell Press journals. Matthew earned his BS in Chemical Engineering from Georgia Institute of Technology and his PhD in Chemical Engineering from the University of California at Berkeley, where he studied the biological effects of air plasmas. He studied analytical chemistry as a postdoctoral researcher at Northeastern University, and then he joined Cell Press at the start of 2016. So Matthew is a senior manager in the Trends Group and has also worked in secondments as the product manager for Cell Press and as the acting editor-in-chief of Star Protocols. And he's also joined with our second speaker, who is Alki, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Aliki, who received her PhD from the ETH Zurich in Switzerland, where she focused on adipose tissue and the molecular signature and function of brown and white adipocytes in mammals and humans. She then moved on to undertake her postdoctoral training at the University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom, investigating human mutations in genes associated with obesity and thinness. Aliki joined Cell Press in 2023, serving as the editor of Trends in Molecular Medicine. So with that, I'd like to hand over to our speakers today. And our audience, again, for those that joined late, if you have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A box and we'll be sure to address them. Thank you. Aliki, Matthew, are you able to unmute and share your screens?
Yes, thank you so much. I can share first my screen.
Over to you.
Thank you. So I hope my screen is visible. And today we're going to talk about the editor's guide to navigating peer review. And before we start, and we mentioned all the information how to navigate peer review as an author and as a reviewer, we just wanted to give you a short overview of why peer review. So peer review is a formal part of scientific communication since the first scientific journal appeared. It exists for several reasons. First of all, to validate the academic work, as a quality control measure to ensure that the quality and integrity of scientific research is maintained, and to increase the networking possibilities within the research communities. The peer review process might seem daunting, but it's a vital component of academic research and publishing, and it is crucial for professional growth. And of course, it's one of the ways to get detailed, unbiased feedback from experts in a field, which will allow you to strengthen your work. This is a brief overview of the editorial process. So the authors submit their paper through an online submission system. The editors receive the article, and then there can be two different ways. The article can be immediately rejected before passing peer review for several reasons, or go through peer review, where the editors will find reviewers or experts in the field to provide feedback on the article. And depending on the feedback and their own personal views, they will actually reach a decision for the article. So I will talk about how to navigate the peer review as an author. There are different peer review stages. The first one is that you submitted your article through an online system in the preferred journal, which is, of course, a big step. Then each journal will send an email with relevant information for the submission. Those need to be read carefully, as it is a guideline through the whole process. Of course, the online system will be able also to show updates on the article depending on the peer review stage. The manuscript submitted means that it's received by the editorial office and goes through the technical checking and editor assignment. When the online system mentions that it's with the editor, the manuscript is assigned to an editor. That will be the point of contact. Of course, as I mentioned before, there might be a rejection before it even passes the peer review. This means that you will receive a decision letter from the editor explaining the reasons of rejection and whether there is an option to transfer your article in another journal. Then the article would go through peer review, so under review, the editor has invited reviewers for the article and waits the reports. And then sometimes there would be the update of required reviews completed, so that the required numbers of reviewers have submitted their reports. That depends on the number of reviewers that every journal requires for every article. But it does not mean that the review of your article is completed. It means that the minimum number of reviews is received. The editor will go through the reports, would read the article, and then would either reach a decision or have to invite more reviewers for the article for several reasons. Once the decision is reached, the editor will actually send an email with the decision letter. You can always check the submission system for the article's progress, but don't refresh any minute and don't obsess over it. Things might be in motion even if the status of your article is stuck to under review. But if you see that several months have passed and the editor has not communicated with you otherwise, then contact the editor and ask for an update. All editors are happy to help. So what are the different decisions once the reviewers submitted their reports? Based on the feedback received by the reviewers and the editor's own evaluation of the manuscript, it will decide one of the following: either to reject the manuscript after peer review, to revise with either major or minor revisions needed, or to accept with no revisions. When you receive the editor's decision letter, read it carefully, together with the reviewer's comments, and proceed planning your reply once you cleared your head. Sometimes the decision letter might be too overwhelming, especially if you're waiting for a long time for the reviews to come back. Always have in mind when you read the reviewer's comments that the reviewers provided their feedback based solely on what you have written and discussed in your article. And remember that having an article accepted with no revisions or with minor revisions is usually rare. What happens if your article was rejected after the peer review process? The editor, considering the reviews, decided that your article does not pass the peer review and is rejected. This could be due to different reasons. It may not fit the scope of the journal, or it may not advance the field, or the question behind the work is not of interest. It might be that extended revisions are required, or additional experiments that need to be performed that would not be possible to complete in a reasonable time for publication. It might be that the methodology is flawed according to what the reviewers have commented or not be reproducible. The procedures or the analysis of the data might be defective or not statistically valid, or that the conclusions cannot be justified based on the rest of the paper. So there are illogical arguments, the data do not support the conclusions, or large portions of the literature are ignored. Even if your article was rejected, this is okay. Regardless of the reasons, the peer review process should provide feedback. So in the decision letter, you will receive full reports from the reviewers. See this as an opportunity to revise your work, improve your article, and submit it to another journal. Read the comments carefully. Try not to get angry, embarrassed, or ashamed of your work. Each author gets in a similar position, and always remember that even the top scientists, regardless of their years of experience, have gotten rejection decisions before. If you have been affected psychologically by the comments and feel frustrated or sad, that is okay. Sleep on them for a few days to calm down before you reply. Time to return to them with a clear mind, read them in detail, and improve whatever you think can be improved. Talk to your co-authors if you have, and other scientists that can propose other journals that could be a good fit. One of good advice I have is, prior to submitting a paper to a journal, have in mind another 2-3 alternative journals for a submission in case you get a rejection decision. Read the decision letter carefully, because the editor might have made some comments regarding your article, and also might have proposed transferring your article to another suitable journal. And of course, you could always write a rebuttal letter. This is a letter where you explain to the editor why you think your article was rejected based on incorrect criticism, and whether the editor could reconsider that decision. If you have received a decision letter saying that you have to resubmit your work with major or minor revisions, that means that with major revisions, your article needs significant work and further review before acceptance, while with minor changes, potentially without further review, that means it needs minor revisions. Take a deep breath and start planning the revision of your article. Remember that revisions and reviewers' feedback are there to improve and strengthen your article, so try to focus on the comments and avoid any emotional reactions. If some of the comments are unclear, you can always ask the editor to assist you and provide further explanations or discuss it with other scientists. The editors are here to help you navigate this process and makes it easier at each step, so don't be afraid to ask for their help. How to deal now with the reviewer's reports in major or minor revisions? Usually, authors are often asked to address all concerns noted by the reviewers. You might agree with all the comments, and that's nice, but you might also disagree with some of them, which is also fine. You should base, though, your disagreement on convincing reasoning and strong scientific support. What is usually really helpful for all submissions and in all journals is to provide a response letter to the reviewer's comments. First, you copy-paste the reviewer's comments as they are written without changing any language to a different file. And below each comment, you explain how you've addressed the issue and the changes you've made in your revised article, or why you didn't do so. And it's easier if you can use a different color for the responses, especially for the editors. Try to provide clear, concise, and convincing answers with detailed explanations, and always be on topic. Use scientific references where needed, and depending on the context, some answers could be just one word, whilst others are paragraphs long. Try to be polite in your answers and not enter into a personal debate with the reviewers or criticize their comments. Even if you don't like some of the comments, think whether they can actually improve the article and if the reviewer is right. Sometimes reviewers might not have understood something in your article. And remember that if they didn't and they are the experts in the field, then the readers might also not understand it and come to similar conclusions when reading your article. So try to improve those areas. Try to do an excellent and thorough work to revise your article, regardless whether you have a major or minor revisions decision. And since it has been a while that you read your article, go through it again. You've also made the revisions, so you've made the changes that the experts have said, and try to increase its quality further now that you have feedback from other experts. The editors usually will provide a timeline for completing your revisions. This is in line with what the journal wants. It's nice to let them know what you will meet the deadline, but if you need an extension for any reason, don't be afraid to ask. Specify though clearly your reasons and ask the extension within reasonable limits. If it's 2 weeks or 1 month, it might be fine, but if it's a year, then probably it's not okay for the journal. Also, and more important, give time to your co-authors, if you have any, to work on the revisions carefully and to approve the revised version of your article and the written or response. Each researcher will have a different way of reading the reviewers and the reviewers' comments, and that would be really nice to implement in your article. Although things seem to be fine with all the reviewers' comments, sometimes they might be a little bit unprofessional or not constructive. And they might have also a negative impact on the authors. Unprofessional comments could include those that personally tag the author and their work, but those that they lack constructive criticism and they just mention things from the article, but they are harsh or cruel, commenting on aspects of the article that are not based on the scientific content, for example, about language, or that they urge the citation of the reviewer's work even without irrelevance. Sometimes reviewers would try to push the citation of their own papers, even though you don't need to mention them in your article, and that is a big red flag. Also, unprofessional comments that dwell on the reviewer's work in the field and not explaining or commenting on your work are also unprofessional. So the editors are there to protect the authors from any inappropriate and unprofessional comments, and they can ask the reviewers to change their language. Sometimes the editors will also exclude completely the reviewer report to their decision, and they will have to find more reviewers for the article. The inappropriate and unethical behavior of a reviewer could also be stressed out in the response letter and the cover letter you send to the editor together with your submission. Remember that the editor is always your point of contact and the one that tries to help you through the whole process. Here are just some brief examples of peer review comments. So the first one up here is for minor revisions. The reviewer thought that the article was well written and easy to comprehend and had some minor points that needed to be explained from the authors. Here is a list of major revisions. So you see that they are pretty detailed, and the reviewer will provide several comments on the article. And here is a list of an article that was rejected, even though the reviewer found that the topic was interesting. After carefully reviewing the manuscript, it did not significantly add to other recent articles that were out there. And also it was lacking some publications and discussion on them. The reviewer, though, provided a detailed feedback on the article so that the author could improve it for a next submission. So how long is an article under review and how long the process goes? It has different time lengths and depends on several factors. Among them is the time needed to find reviewers that accept to review your article. So sometimes the editors might need to contact 2 reviewers and it's fine, but sometimes numerous reviewers are needed to get the required number of reviews. It also depends on the time of the year your article is submitted. Usually authors try to submit closer to holiday periods so that they get it out of their hands. But you have to remember that editors and reviewers also go on holidays, and that means that your article might be delayed. Also, it really depends on the time that the reviewers need for providing feedback. Usually journals give between 10 to 20 days for reviews, but sometimes external factors might delay them. So they might ask for extension of the time. Or some journals might give more time, so a month or 2. You have to really carefully see what the journals comment about their peer review process and the length. Try to be patient when your article is under review. Have in mind, though, that the editors do their best to get the reviews and reach their first decision as soon as possible. Sometimes, as I told you, they might need to find more reviewers if they think that the reviews provided are not sufficient or constructive, and that might take more time. So some things to keep in mind, and as a take-home message, navigating the peer review process as an author can look sometimes as a difficult and daunting task, especially if you've not done it for several times. Remember that the editors are your point of contact and the people who want to help you through the peer review process. Don't be afraid to contact them, ask for help and explanations when things are not clear. Discuss with them any concerns you have for the reviewers' comments. The reviewers provide their comments based on what you have written in your article. They also have been in the position of an author as you, and their articles have gone through the same process, so they know how it works. And be patient through the whole process. Be polite to your response letters and make the best of each comment and decision. My advice would be to have fun during the journey of peer review. And regardless of the outcome, remember that you will come out of it each time wiser, knowledgeable, and experienced. I'll just now give Matt the time to talk about how to navigate the review process as a reviewer.
All right, thank you, Aliki. That was a really great overview of how to navigate peer review from an author perspective, and now I'll talk about how to do it from a reviewer perspective. So first of all, who might be invited to review? Maybe you've never done it before, or you're curious about your own manuscripts of how people get chosen to review papers. Generally, it's anyone who might submit to that same journal. So maybe you have some recent research, you have expertise in the topic, or your work has been cited in that manuscript under review. And I think both of those can be good reasons to consider you as a potential reviewer. Editors do take author recommendations into account. So maybe if you've submitted before and you might have had to fill out those reviewer recommendations, we do look at those. I generally like to invite the suggested reviewers unless I have a good reason not to. And those reasons might be they've already reviewed another manuscript or they've done so recently. There's a conflict of interest, or maybe they just don't have the right expertise and I'm looking for somebody else. Practices do vary at different journals, so different editors might answer this question differently, and just because you're not suggested doesn't mean I won't invite you. You also, at many journals, have the opportunity to oppose reviewers. I never invite those, and you don't have to give a reason for why somebody's opposed. You can just, if you think they won't give your manuscript a fair critique, you can say, I don't want them to review my paper, and that's fine. I never invite them, and my colleagues wouldn't either, with the caveat that you can't oppose an entire university or country. My colleagues like to joke about the time where they got the paper where somebody tried to oppose the entire country of France. That's probably not realistic, but if there's 2 individual French researchers that you just professionally don't get along with, that's fine. Postdocs, early career researchers, I think can be excellent reviewers. I think at that stage, you're still really connected to the literature and you know the recent publications in the area. But you've had that time to build up some expertise. And if you're a more established researcher, feel free to include your trainees, but just let the editor know. And again, this practice differs from journal to journal as well, but most journals will think this is a good training opportunity, just as long as you let the editor know what you're doing. So let's talk about conflict of interest a little more. Every time somebody suggests a reviewer, or if I have a reviewer in mind that could be good, I'm going to check for a conflict of interest. And so I'm going to find things like multiple publications together over the last few years, if you're currently collaborating, if you have affiliations in common. So if it's your, department colleague from down the hall, that's a conflict. I'm probably not going to invite that person to review. Things that are not considered conflicts. So if you've published a few times in the past, that's usually fine, especially if it's on like a many author study or some consensus or position paper. If you've previously collaborated a long time ago, maybe you were a visiting scholar in that person's lab or vice versa, as long as it's not directly tied to that particular research project, I'm usually fine with that. And if you've served on the same panel, organized a conference, maybe you're academic co-editors of a different journal, associate editors, whatever, that's usually not a conflict in terms of review. We can miss some things. So for example, if you're new collaborators, if you have just started working together, but have not published together yet, we might miss that. If you're personal friends, we have no way of knowing who your outside of work colleagues are, or if it was some long ago trainee mentor relationship. For instance, if you were a postdoc in somebody's lab and publishing under a different name than you use today, even the regular checks we do for conflict are probably going to miss that. Okay, so why should you want to review? I know peer review is not always at the top of everyone's favorite list of things to do as an academic or as a researcher. You have lots of demands on your time. You have to do experiments, write your own papers, maybe you teach, maybe you mentor students or other trainees. But peer review is really a sort of buy-in, pay-out kind of system. So the idea is, as a reviewer, you're giving beneficial comments on your colleagues' papers with the idea that when you submit, they're going to do the same thing for you. You also might learn something. So if you review a paper that hasn't been published yet, you get to see how the other researchers in your field work. You might learn about really cutting-edge science or a really cool new experiment or technique even before it's published. It's also a really great way to cultivate a relationship with an editor. So if you are invited to review and you give really helpful, instructive, insightful comments, that's a way that you can demonstrate your authority in the field to the editor. And that might work favorably for you later. For instance, if the editor wants to invite you to write something, or if you want to get more involved as perhaps on the advisory board of that journal. And finally, you can have a say in how the research in your field is presented to a broader audience. So if you put your comments in a submitted manuscript, you get to say, even before the public reads this paper, hey, I think this is how we should be talking about our field. What if you don't think you can do it? So if you get an invitation and you can't make it work, that's fine. Maybe you're traveling. If you're on parental leave, that's probably the best reason of all not to want to review. It can be more dramatic. So one time I had somebody decline because a tree had fallen on his house. The main reason people say is they just don't have time. They have a lot of other responsibilities and they can't fit it in. All of this is okay. It's okay to decline the invitation. We really appreciate if you just give a short reason why. We don't need the life story, just a few sentences. It's great if you say whether you're willing to review in the future. And best of all, if you can suggest just one or two people who also have expertise in your field who we might be able to invite instead of you. If you don't respond to the invitation, then I can't be sure that you received it. And so the worst case is when a reviewer accepts the invitation and then disappears. At that time, I could have been searching for other reviewers. The author gets frustrated because there's a delay. There's this sort of pending or, under review status in the system. As an author, you might have seen that before and gotten frustrated. And the biggest reason this happens is because a reviewer initially commits and then never submits their comments. Right. So what do you comment on as a reviewer? I'd say that scientific accuracy is the single most important reason. Some things to think about here. Did the authors perform reasonable experiments to answer the questions they're interested in? Do the statistics, error analysis, technical replicates give you a sense of how strong the result is or how reproducible it is? Are there error bars? Do the experimental results support the conclusions? And if not, you don't necessarily have to reject the paper. The authors might be able to tone down their claims and make them more modest, or maybe they can do more experiments to better support far-reaching claims. And are the results displayed in the way that makes sense? So Do they have figures? Maybe a table is better. If they've chosen a graph, is it a reasonable kind of graph? Again, are there error bars? Another thing you want to comment on is clarity and novelty. So do the authors explain what they did and why? Are the concepts explained correctly? Is terminology used consistently? Do the authors explain their own hypothesis versus a sort of opinion or consensus in the field versus undisputed bedrock fact? Is the message clear? Can you tell what the authors are trying to say? Their grammar and usage don't need to be perfect. We get a lot of people submitting to our journals that are not native English speakers, and that's fine. They don't need to have every subject and verb and every punctuation mark correct. But as a reviewer, you really should be commenting on, can you tell what the authors mean? And then what's new about this research? But I say beware of novelty claims. So a lot of times authors will load statements in their papers like, oh, we are the first to do this, or this is the first demonstration of that. That might be true, but also if something else gets published before your paper, and then we publish it, then we all kind of bad. And so a lot of journals, some of the self-press journals even, have policies of not including any sort of novelty claim. If the authors have included, we are the first, or this is the best, I think that deserves extra special scrutiny. Really broadly in terms of clarity and novelty is if somebody picks up this paper and they read it, and maybe they're not as strong an expert in the field as you are or the authors, are they going to be able to understand what the authors did? A third thing is background and discussion. So this is really about how does this work fit into the literature and how does it fit into what people have done previously? So is there a good justification for it? Again, explain the relevant body of literature, how the results fit in. Does it cite and discuss the recent research that's important? Or on the other hand, are any of their citations disputed or discredited? If so, does it acknowledge that? Sometimes the authors, probably subconsciously, will try to explain their own results or their favorite publications out of proportion with their importance to the field. And so sometimes I'll see these papers where there's an entire paragraph dedicated to just one reference, and it happens to be the author's own work. And then the next paragraph has about 16 references that are explained in short phrases. Are the data and conclusions from the cited publications faithfully represented? Now, as a reviewer, we don't necessarily expect you to have intimate familiarity with every single cited publication, especially if it's a long article. There can be 100 of these things. We don't need you to read every single paper they've cited, but because you are an expert in the field, maybe you're familiar with some of these already. You have a good sense, at least an intuition of what the results are. And if something jumps out to you as not quite right, or if the authors have missed something that they really ought to have included, then you should definitely comment on that too. Is the level of detail reasonable? So usually if you cite a reference, you don't need to explain the experimental steps and the numerical results and every single conclusion in great detail. Usually summary is okay. There are some papers where if you're directly responding or extending a prior work, then you might want to include some more detail. If it's more of a background, like, hey, this is how the field started 20 years ago, then you might need to include less. And as a reviewer, you know that really well. I'll end by saying that you should use common sense and humility if you're tempted to ask the authors to cite your own work. You can, of course, if you have published a sort of seminal paper in this area, and you think it should be included, that's fine. What we really don't want you to do as a reviewer, and I think Aliki mentioned this too, is to say, okay, here's 20 papers you need to cite, and 18 of them happen to be by me. What don't you need to comment on? So things like formatting, journal requirements, that's really the editor's job. And so I understand that really well. I'm not also expecting you to do that too. Sometimes we'll get comments like, okay, well, this is, 100 words over the limit. And it's like, I can also tell if it's 100 words over the limit. What I'm asking you is more like, oh, the historical perspective didn't add much insight. And so maybe that gives me an idea of what the authors can cut to actually meet the requirements. Most journals have at least some degree of copy editing and typesetting. Some very large volume online only journals have less of this, but the trends journals that Aliki and I work on have professional copy editing, professional typesetting before things are published. And that standardizes things like grammar, usage, punctuation, style, US versus UK English, how the references are formatted. So as a peer reviewer, you don't need to spend your time on those aspects. Maybe you really want to, maybe you sort of missed your calling and you should have been a copy editor all along and you love fixing style inconsistencies and telling people where brackets ought to go. You can make those comments, but also a professional is going to address them before the thing gets published. So you really, I promise you don't need to include this in your review. Just as an example, so here's one with way too much detail about these things. Described can be changed to studied. Add and before since. Application can be changed to applications. If these things are really impeding how you understand the paper, and if the author's message is totally unclear because they've made these mistakes, then yeah, maybe you should comment on them. But this is not really what we're looking for in terms of a scientific peer review. The other end of the spectrum is this one that I got a few months ago, where the only comment to the author was, this is a very well-written review. And that might be the case. And, I believe the reviewer that it was. But as Aliki already mentioned, for a paper to be accepted straight away with no sort of improvement, no modification, is very rare. And when a reviewer submits comments like this, it makes us wonder how thoroughly the reviewer actually read the paper, because if they have no suggestions for the author for improvement, that might be the first time ever. So if you've gone through all that, maybe you've made some notes either on the manuscript or in a Word document or something like that, how do you want to frame them and submit them to the editor? I'll emphasize again, your task is not to rip the submission to shreds. Sometimes we get very eager first-time reviewers who, I don't know if they think they have something to prove or if they really just want to demonstrate that they are authoritative experts. They'll come in kind of guns blazing and just want to rip this thing. That's not what we're looking for, right? We want reviewers to help the authors improve the manuscript, and secondarily, to help the editor and help the journal publish something worthwhile. So be nice. Use professional courtesy, do unto the authors as you'd have them do to you. You want to leave the kind of comments on someone's paper that you would be comfortable receiving on your own paper. You might want to organize your thoughts by starting with a summary of the manuscript. This is a pretty common tactic for writing up reviewer comments. You don't have to do this, but you can if you'd like. Your first paragraph really should explain the manuscript's strengths and weaknesses, if there are any major ones, along with a succinct recommendation. So, this paper does this well, it has these few deficiencies. I recommend accepting it once these errors have been corrected, something along those lines. Then you want to describe any major concerns followed by minor ones. You can do this in the order they appear in the manuscript or in order of importance, just however your brain works better. And make sure that your comments are consistent with your recommendation. So sometimes we'll say, okay, you should accept this with minor revision. And then there's like 3 pages of very important, critical scientific flaws of the paper. On the other hand, maybe we get reject and there's only 2 comments and it's like the authors didn't discuss this one body of literature that I think is important. Well, the authors can fix that. And so that's probably not a grounds for rejection. So what do decision terms mean? Aliki touched on this as well, but I want to talk about it again from the reviewer perspective. So I like to say, imagine an average researcher who's interested, but not an expert in the specific topic of this paper. You want to ask yourself, can she understand this? Did the manuscript clearly tell her what the authors did and why they did it? And is she going to appreciate what makes this research new and different and interesting without any overly inflated claims of novelty or priority? The specific recommendation terms are going to vary by journal. So if you're reviewing for a trends journal versus reviewing for another self-press journal versus a completely different journal altogether, you might have different options for what you can recommend in terms of the decision. Here are some general kind of categories that you might see. I think of an accept recommendation is just publish this thing as it is, and the only improvements that need to be made are in terms of language or formatting, which again are not tasks that we're asking you to comment on necessarily. I think of a minor revision as one that meets those criteria I described above, but could still be improved. And maybe you can improve it with better figures, extending the discussion, clarifying some technical points, adding some simple experiments or controls to make the claim stronger. I think of major revision as one that doesn't meet those criteria, but it probably can after a thorough revision. And that might include extensive new experiments, reanalysis of the data, a reappraisal of how these results fit into the literature. But there's something good there. It just needs to be teased out a little bit. And I think if a reject is something that's so deeply flawed that it's never going to meet those criteria, no matter how much the authors revise it, maybe there's just deficiencies in the experimental design that they can't work through. And this is just a flawed concept that the authors probably need to move on from. What happens after review? So this goes into the editor's hands at this point, and the editor is going to wait for enough reviews, and then send the revision suggestions or rejection letter. I get the question all the time of how many reviewers do you need? It depends on the paper, it depends on the circumstance. So one review is usually insufficient. We just want to make sure that we have enough independent voices commenting on the paper. This is a fairness to the author sort of thing. I think 2 reviews can be enough if they say similar things, if they have consistent recommendations, if they've kind of picked up on the same parts of the manuscript that the authors need to improve. 3 reviews is kind of the gold standard, so this is really great if we can get it. That can give more confidence. I will say that if I have 2 reviews and they're consistent, I'm probably not going to hold out for a 3rd review. And this is in terms of fairness to the author too, so they can get started working on and improving their paper. Beyond 3, I think, is diminishing returns. So probably if we already have 3 thorough, well thought out sets of comments, a 4th one is probably not going to add too much more beyond what we already have, and that might just draw out the process. Sometimes you might get more than 3 reviews in your paper, and that's because we usually invite more than 3 people to start with. If they all say yes, and if they all submit their comments in a timely manner, then that's great, and we'll send you all the comments. Okay, then the authors revise, and Aliki covered this. The editor then will determine whether re-review and re-revision are necessary. So especially if multiple reviewers requested to see the manuscript again, or if the revisions are highly technical. So if I, as the editor, don't feel like I have the right expertise to assess if the authors actually did these things, then I will definitely send it for another round of peer review. If it's more, okay, minor revision, fix this figure, add some more references, those kinds of things, then I am more comfortable rather, as an editor making those decisions myself. Ultimately, the editor is going to either accept or reject. I'll say that multiple re-review cycles are rare, so you're probably not going to get into like a re-review situation. It might be that your paper is accepted at round 4 revision, but the last 2 rounds are technical things that comply with journal requirements and formatting and things like that. Really, the reviewers are realistically going to see this paper once, usually twice, probably not more than that. I want to talk a little bit about how review articles are peer-reviewed. Of course, this is a subject close to our hearts as editors of reviews journals. So this is not research articles now, but review content. There's some similarities between research articles and review. And so I say reviews, and I understand this could be confusing, but here I mean review articles in contrast to research articles. So I think as a reviewer of these kinds of papers, a professional objective demeanor is critical. Understand what the journal is looking for, but you don't need to copy edit. You don't need to be the formatting police. Reviewers should talk to the editor about conflicts or delays. And critically, the reviewer's task is to help improve the manuscript, not to give reasons why it shouldn't be published. There are some differences. So I think good communication, accessible writing is critical for any kind of scientific publication, just to make sure that as many of your colleagues as possible can understand it. It's important for research articles, but it's absolutely essential for reviews, because in a review article, the thing that you're writing really is the entire point, whereas in a research article, it's more of a means to conveying a research finding. In a review article, there's no methodology, data analysis, or statistics to evaluate. So I think it's actually a little bit easier to review a review article than a research article. The novelty in review articles should be assessed on discussion, not the results, because there aren't any results. It's really important, I mentioned this briefly before, to distinguish consensus from author opinion. So, this is a prevailing thought in the field versus this is what I personally think. Timeliness is a really big deal in review articles. If a research finding is correct and answers a question of interest and did the right experiments to answer that question, then great, we'll publish it. Even if it's not maybe the hottest topic right now. But I think as reviews editors, we really are looking for those things that are super timely and things that a lot of people care a lot about today. I'll end with some do's and don'ts. So hopefully these are practical tips you can take away with you. I've mentioned all these before. This is just to drive the point home. So do be professional and constructive in your comments. Use language that you would not be offended to read in comments on your own paper. Don't hide behind that wall of anonymity to, be more forceful. Just be professional, be objective. If you're a more established researcher, do invite your trainees to contribute. If you're earlier in your career, ask your supervisor if you can contribute as a learning experience. So long as you inform the editor, just make sure this is okay with the journal first. Inform the editor of any conflicts of interest. Don't commit to reviewing a manuscript if you know you can't meet the deadline, but do inform the editor if there's a delay. Again, do pay particular attention to scientific accuracy, the most important thing you will comment on. Also comment on things like clarity, accessibility, and broader implications. Don't feel compelled to line edit grammar, usage, or punctuation. Don't disproportionately focus on reasons to reject. Remember, you're being invited to help the authors improve, not to tear them down. And the number one rule of working with an editor is just ask the editor if something isn't clear or if you think you need some guidance. I want to talk a little bit about AI. This is a little bit of a diversion, but it's something that comes up a lot recently. I think if you came here early, you might have seen a little video playing about some of Elsevier's applications of AI. AI can do a lot of stuff really well, but there's some really important warnings, I would say, for using it in the context of scientific publishing. So AI is pretty good at summarizing a scientific field pretty accurately at a college freshman-ish level of detail. Something else that AI can do a great job of is explaining the same concept for multiple audiences. It's just okay at reference citations. So sometimes it'll mix up a title and author. It'll give you a real paper, but say it's published in the wrong journal. Occasionally, it'll fabricate entire fake articles. It's pretty bad at comparing across articles. So for doing things like, how does this fit into the literature? Like we talked about a few minutes ago. It is not currently equipped to peer review. And this is why I wanted to bring this up in the context of this talk. AI can't critique experimental design, it can't interpret results, it can't assess whether results support conclusions. It doesn't understand things like conceptual events or qualitative importance. So is this an idea worth publishing is something that AI just cannot do. And it cannot ever provide human level insight. So, you are the people who are doing the experiments, using instruments, implementing protocols. The AI isn't, and it will never have that level of understanding. Good uses of AI. So you might want to, if you are writing a paper, to create a generic outline, checking spelling, grammar, usage, that's all perfectly good. You can change the tone if you need to. Summarizing for non-experts, I think, is a really powerful use, as long as you check the policies and declare that you've done this. You don't want to use AI to write a whole manuscript. You're probably sophisticated enough to understand this, but people have tried it. And again, in the context of this talk, so it's unacceptable to use AI to peer review a manuscript or a grant proposal. And there's a few reasons for that. One of them has to do with confidentiality and privacy. So when you upload something to an AI program, something like ChatGPT, for instance, it's not clear what happens to it, right? And they might actually use that information as training data to improve their own model. That's a breach of confidentiality because the author's understanding was that you and you alone were going to see the paper. As an author service, you're expecting a human to provide that human level insight. And it's not quite what you signed up for as an author if you're just getting comments from the computer. There's also things like ownership ethics. So putting your name on it. And this is the next point that I make too. You can never list something like ChatGPT as an author or as a reviewer because it can't take ownership of what it produced the same way that a human author can. And again, even if you use something for an acceptable purpose without disclosing it, that's also unethical. Great. So maybe you've listened for the last 45 minutes and you're thinking, yes, peer review is for me. I really want to get involved with this process. How do I do it? The good news is Elsevier has some really great resources. So I would recommend starting at the Reviewer Hub and or the Certified Peer Reviewer course. So the Reviewer Hub is going to let you sort of collate all of your contributions. You can set preferences for things like your fields of interest, what time you'll be available and not. And the peer reviewer course through Researcher Academy is, I think, probably about 10 webinars of varying lengths designed to really get you started as a peer reviewer in more detail than I have today. At CellPress, I think the best way to get started is with our protocols platform, Star Protocols. As Dineshri mentioned, I was the acting editor-in-chief of this journal at the beginning of this year, and so I've gotten to know it pretty well. Star Protocols really likes to include early career researchers, so more senior graduate students, postdocs, very new professors, people like the maybe lecturer or new staff scientist level. As a peer reviewer for Star Protocols, it's less about assessing research and more about assessing the reproducibility and the understandability of a protocol. So this is probably your best entry point into reviewing for CellPress. You can go to the Star Protocols website, click the Volunteer to be a Star Protocols Reviewer. If you've already done the Certified Peer Reviewer course, you can upload your proof of completion, and then that'll go into a database, and they will very happily consider you as a reviewer. The last thing I'll say is, when in doubt, ask the editor. So Aliki and I have been there before. We have written papers. We've struggled with hard to follow reviewer comments. We've balanced all the complicated tasks of being a lab researcher. Every editor has a different personality. You know, maybe we enjoy building relationships or the technical communication or just the fundamentals of the science. We're here to help. So it's in our best interest and your best interest when we publish the best papers possible. It's literally our job to do whatever we can to assist authors. So, you know, don't feel scared. If you want to reach out to us in any kind of capacity, feel free to do that, and we'll be happy to help. Here's our contact information. And at this point, I think we've got about 10 minutes for questions.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Brilliant presentation as always, and thank you for supporting the Researcher Toolbox. I also would like to thank Aliki. This presentation was extremely informative, and it's a very important topic in our region. It's something that's a research goal to have more reviewers that are based in Africa. So having webinars like this really helps. And really, thank you for making the time to present in our series. You have presented previously, Matthew, and Aliki. Thank you for your first time, and we hope to have you back. The Q&A box has some questions in it. So I'd like it if Aliki and Matthew can review those questions and just indicate to me by selecting answer live if you'd like to answer it, Aliki or Matthew, if you'd like to answer it, just select the answer live button. And then I'll read out the question and you can answer it. To those that have put questions into the chat box, please, this is your opportunity to put it into the Q&A box so that our presenters can see your questions and have them answered. So I'll just give you a minute to review those questions and indicate if you're comfortable to answer that to our speakers. I saw a question from Jared Norman in chat, as well as Marshall Carla in chat. Please retype that into the Q&A box, and we can try and answer your questions. Okay, so while they are copying over their questions, our speakers have indicated the questions that they'd like to answer. So we have a question from Pauline. Please, how would you advise a researcher to suggest a list of reviewers when submitting a manuscript? This is for Matthew.
Sure, that's a really good question. One way to do this is by reading through the papers that you've cited in your manuscript and looking at who wrote those papers. This is sort of a basic way to get started. Chances are you've cited some people who you are already familiar with. Maybe you know them personally, or you're just well acquainted with their work. And maybe in the course of writing the paper, you've come across some new papers that you didn't know about, and you decide to cite their work because it's interesting to you. I think any of those people who wrote those papers could be good reviewers for your own work, because presumably it's related in some capacity. I think another way would be to go to a conference or to go to a workshop or even an online symposium, something like that. And if you hear somebody give a talk or a presentation, or you see a poster of somebody who's doing similar work to yours, that can also be a good, well-qualified person to be a peer reviewer.
Thank you, Matthew. This question for Aliki, it's a bit of a long one. During the peer review process, why is there restriction or reluctance for editors to directly engage or consult with journal board editors to collectively expedite the evaluation of articles that have been in review for an extended duration? Waiting up to 8 months for a decision due to a reviewer being busy or unable to promptly assess a 17-page paper seems unnecessarily prolonged. Could editors intervene when the delay becomes significantly protracted to ensure timely resolution, as extensive waiting periods for rejection or approval can be discouraging for authors or hinder the progress of research? That is for Aliki.
That is an interesting question. It depends on the journal and how much you can consult with the journal board editors. In general, I would say that editors do intervene when the delay is prolonged. So we try our best to either find new reviewers when we see that the reviewers we have invited are not responsive. In the trans journal, several times we talk to our editorial board members for suggestions of other reviewers, or for if they want to review the article. In general, I understand that extensive waiting periods, they are discouraging for authors, and 8 months do sound a lot. But it really depends on the journal, on the editor, and on, of course, the reviewers. So sometimes it's really difficult. It might be a paper and an article that it's really niche dependent, so you cannot invite several reviewers, or that there is big conflict of interest between the authors and the reviewers. So we do try our best, and trying to find as many reviewers as possible, and even send them emails and try to connect with them and ask them for their feedback as soon as possible.
Thank you so much, Aliki. The next question is from John. What if there are a number of language errors which affect the quality of work? Shouldn't or can't the reviewer comment on that? That is for Matthew.
Yes, absolutely. The reviewer should comment on that. And I think this goes to accessibility, and this goes to the appreciation to a wider audience. So I think if the language errors are so significant that an average reader wouldn't be able to understand the message, that is definitely a valuable comment for you to make as a reviewer. What we're not asking you to do is provide suggestions for correcting every single one of those language mistakes. You don't need to do that. But at a more general level of, okay, I couldn't understand the discussion because there's so many language errors, and the authors need to improve this before resubmission, that's a really, really good reviewer comment to make.
Thank you, Matthew. And we have a final question, and that is for Aliki. How do you handle conflicting reviews from reviewers?
That's a very interesting question. There are several times where you have conflicting reviews from reviewers. So the first thing would be to wait for another reviewer. So if you have two, that one of them send rejected and the other one send minor revisions, then you will definitely either wait if you have another reviewer, or invite more reviewers. Of course, always, if you know the topic and you also understand the article, especially for us working in reviews, and as an editor, you can also charts, the comments. So you can also see what the reviewers have mentioned and see whether you think that the article needs major revision or needs to be rejected. Yeah, I think just inviting more reviewers and seeing what other experts think would actually get you out of the conflict of different reviews.
Thank you so much, Aliki. There was one more question in chat, and the person lost the connection, so he wasn't able to post it in Q&A. But I'm going to read it out, and if either of you comfortable to answer this, you can let me know. He said that he was invited to review for a fairly prestigious journal. He accepted and worked through the paper, but when he signed into the portal the day before the review was due, there was a note that a decision had been made and that the review was no longer required. There was no further feedback, and he is wondering if that is normal. He thought about writing to the editor, or at least just to find out why. Can either of you comment on that?
Sure, I can comment on that. That's not normal, at least how I would run the journal that I work on. Maybe different editors have different approaches here. Definitely, if somebody has committed to review and I'm waiting on their recommendation or their comments, I'm going to wait until at least the deadline that the system has assigned them. If it goes beyond that deadline and I already have multiple sets of comments, maybe if reviewer number 3 is a week late, but reviewers number 1 and 2 have already submitted, and they have really consistent comments that give me a good direction, I might at that time remove the invitation from reviewer 3 because they're late and they've probably gotten multiple reminder emails. I think that the same thing happening before the review being due would be rare. There might have been a reason for it, but I think it would be good editorial practice for the editor to at least tell you why they did that. And, in terms of the outcome, for confidentiality, the editor may or may not tell you the outcome of a paper that you didn't actually review. So I'm not sure what to say about that necessarily, but at least for giving you until the due date to submit your comments, I think that you should probably be allowed to do that. And I think if that happens to you and you're confused about why, I think that emailing the editor is a really good idea.
Thank you, Matthew. And I see you indicated that you'd like to take the last question from Harold. AI quite often gives non-existent dysfunctional web links or difficult to find boo references. How easy is it to check the correctness of such references?
It can be very difficult because they can be reasonable appearing at first, but then you do a little digging and you find out that they're not real, or maybe the title of the paper is real and the authors are correct, but the AI has given you the wrong name of the journal. I think, unless you want to spend a lot of time looking into Scopus or your other favorite database, it can be really, really hard to assess that. And that's one of many, many reasons that we don't think that AI is really equipped to use for peer review at this point in time.
Perfect. So I did put a link in the chat box to the Researcher Academy course. It's one of the courses on peer review, but there are few. So you can bookmark that link and save it and visit the Researcher Academy. The Researcher Academy is hosted by Elsevier, and it is free to access any of the courses on the Researcher Academy, and you do receive a certificate on completion of the course. That's a nice learning aid to this webinar. So I do encourage everyone to take note of the website and give it a try. And as we've reached the end of our hour, I would like to sincerely thank both of our speakers. This was really a great presentation. I learned a lot. I can see from the audience comments that they enjoyed it as well. Really, thank you for availing yourselves and for sharing this vital information with us. There were a lot of requests for your presentation. So if you wouldn't mind sending it to me, I will forward it on to the audience. And the recording will be made available on the Africa Researcher Success portal. So you can Google that and you can get onto the portal and you'll be able to rewatch this webinar. Thank you to the audience for attending. And I look forward to seeing you in our last session for the on the researcher cycle. Thanks, everyone. Bye.